So welcome everybody to Intelligence on the Edge, how AI and machine learning can transform your operations. I'm Michael Maxey with ZEDEDA. Today I'm joined by Harsh from Centreon and Chamara from Anthosa. How you doing, guys? Welcome.
Hey, Maxey.
Hey,
Hey,
Maxey.
Harsh.
Hey,
Yeah,
Chamara. Doing well, thank you.
awesome. So maybe let me set this up a little bit and start with maybe some of what are the challenges around edge computing. And we're going to be talking a lot about edge today and AI and ML, and we're going to dive into a customer use case, pretty interesting one in my opinion, around 4x4 vehicles. But before we get into that, let's start with a little bit around like what are some of the challenges and what are we addressing as we come together as an alliance here. And to start with, some of these are really edge related, and it starts with scale. When you're in a data center, scale is more racks, it's more power, it's a couple people to manage it. But when you're outside of the data center, you're in edge locations, you don't have the people that can cover that. You turn into solutions where you have distributed compute in all sorts of different locations. They could be in your manufacturing plant, they can be at well sites, they can be in mines, vehicles, distributed throughout your enterprise, and you need a system for managing those. So it's different than the cloud, and the edge, starts with scale and number of nodes and locations. And then you sort of pile on top of that unique hardware and software. What you build for the cloud sort of mirrors what you build for the edge, but resources are different, abilities to scale are different. So you really need to sort of think through your solution, and often bespoke solutions are the norm. So Chamara, I know you see a lot of this. This is your sort of consulting wheelhouse. I think having an expert like your team on board to help sort of scope, this sea of applications, these sea of hardware tools, and even sort of the business case on the front end is super important. And that's something we see a lot on the edge. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into our use case. And then obviously, because these are enterprise assets, generally running core IP of the enterprise, security is very critical. And security is not only what you'd expect in the data center with firewalls and intrusion detection systems, but these devices are outside the data center. So you have to think about physical security. Somebody can steal this device. They can plug a USB key into it. They can sort of insert a bootloader. These are all sort of attack vectors that you don't necessarily have to consider when your server's behind a locked door in a cooled data center. But outside in the edge, when you're running in manufacturing or in these remote environments, security becomes critical. And a key component of that is observability. And Harsh, you and your team have done a ton around observability. I know there's some security aspects to that. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we get into it. But don't overlook the need for observability and security in general. And then, you kind of come back to, well, what's the point of running this stuff on the edge? And that kind of comes down to local processing. Often these assets are producing the amount of data that it's either cost prohibitive or not even possible to upload to the cloud. Ingress fees are pretty high on the cloud, and the processing can be immense, especially if you think about maybe a video file that produces really high volumes of data. So processing that locally can really save you a lot of money, time, and energy. But it also gives you some data locality securities. If you're operating in the EU, for example, your data can't leave. Maybe it's critical IP. You don't want traversing your network and ending up in a cloud. So there are a number of benefits around sort of processing that data locally, but it comes with challenges around connectivity. Often you don't have reliable connectivity. If you're operating in a mine or you're on a vehicle or even in manufacturing, sometimes you don't have proper data connectivity. So you need to think about solutions that keep running regardless of internet. You can't have your systems going down when your network drops. You need to continue manufacturing. You need to continue drilling. You need to continue producing money for the company. So that's an important aspect to consider when you're thinking about edge computing. And then the last one is probably the most important, and I probably should have started with that one, which is really starting with a business outcome, right? These projects can't be fun. They're not just pet projects. Fundamentally, these are driving value to the enterprise. And it often starts with sort of one use case or one piece of value you can bring to the enterprise. Could be predictive maintenance. It could be better inventory management, like we're going to talk about in our use case today. But you need to get super clear on the outcome, right? You need to know what that outcome is, what it's going to achieve. the business value it's going to bring. You need to clearly define the problems you're solving up front. And then you need to get buy-in, right? It can't just be, your head engineer that wants to do it or your CEO. You in fact need buy-in across the entire enterprise to make sure everybody's aligned, everybody's working towards that same goal, and actually going to deliver that outcome in the end, bring value to the enterprise through these whole projects. So those are some ideas around, some of the unique challenges that you see when you're addressing edge computing and these types of use cases. And again, it's very important to a lot of different businesses. You hear, a common phrase we hear is, data is the new oil, or data is the lifeblood of your organization. And more that's becoming true. If you can take action on that data, you can cut costs, you can build new revenue flows, you can outcompete your competitors. But capturing and managing that is something that, we really help customers solve every day. And that's what helps that outcome, that business outcome I just talked about, is really feeding it with data. And more of that's being produced at the edge. It's harder to manage. I already talked about the cost of uploading it to the cloud. So running it locally really provides a lot of value. So if you can overcome some of those concerns I talked about, it delivers a ton of value being able to run these different workloads at the edge. And that's kind of how our team came together, right? We have an alliance between our companies here. We're going to talk a minute ago. We're going to let Chamara join in and talk about some of our customers here. But together, we can bring a ton of value. First of all, knowing that business outcome up front, doing the work, bringing an expert in that can help align the technical team with the product team and with the C-suite. So they're all aligned on what they want to do, what that outcome is, what the stack might look like. There's then the pivot of don't overbuild. Over designing early basically can put you into components where you wish you'd changed things. So you need to have that balance of understanding the vision, understanding the outcome, getting buy-in on it, but not overbuilding too early. So there's a balance that comes to that through multiple projects and learning how to really be an expert in front of this. And as I mentioned, buy-in across the enterprise is key. You need to have your security teams on board. You need to make sure the networking teams are comfortable, that your engineering teams are building the right applications, that your operations teams can actually deploy and manage this over time. So getting that broad buy-in very early in the process is extremely important. And this alliance kind of helps solve a lot of those technologies. And we'll talk a lot about it, from ZEDEDA, from a edge orchestration perspective. We have Chamara from Anthosa, who does amazing consulting work to help companies along this journey. And then lastly, Harsh with Centreon, talking about how you observe this stuff, make sure it's still secure, make sure it's still running, and get in front of issues to make sure you don't have big downtime and those sorts of things. And then lastly, this alliance really gives you tons of flexibility. There's a lot of open source in sort of our products. There's consulting that can go a lot of different directions. There's a lot of different hardware and software capabilities that these platforms that can support. Think about AI and ML workflow and the hardware that powers that. The NVIDIA Jetsons and IGX solutions, and then there's software solutions on top of that. Open source frameworks like OpenVINO from Intel, which is a pretty decent model factory. Resin AI, cross-platform databases, time series. All of this comes together to go build that outcome and drive value for your enterprise. And the combination of this team, along with some extra technologies, can really help accelerate that and make it a reality for different customers. So that's sort of our setup. I did a quick introduction. So again, I'm Michael Maxey from ZEDEDA. I'm going to hand it over to Chamara from Anthosa, who can kind of introduce us to the use case that we want to talk about, that we work together here, and kind of bring it into the real world around a real world project. And then Harsh and I will weigh in on some of the comments and participate in the discussion here. But before I hand it off, I want to remind folks, please send questions, any comments or questions. We're going to save some time at the end to answer those. You can send them by using the chat feature in the Zoom interface. Just send it to the host and panelists, and we'll pick it up in the Q&A session towards the end of our session here. So Chamara, why don't you jump in here and tell us a little bit about the customer and use case we work together on.
Yeah, thanks, Maxey. That was a great introduction to this alliance and why it's actually important for the region, as well as I guess the broader the digital transformation world as well. To me, I think the importance of this is more around understanding how does this help customers, right? So what I'm going to start to try to do is just walk you through a bit of a customer case study that we worked with together as a team, and then maybe get into the details of what were the problems they faced, and then how did we solve them, and then maybe give you an opportunity to understand, how did this deliver value for this customer. So the customer that we're going to be talking about today is an automobile aftermarket parts manufacturer. It was a family business that had been started about 4 years back, and they've been highly successful, and they've grown to be about 400 people at the time that we were starting to work with them. Right now, actually, they might be even bigger than that. But what they do is they make bull bars or rear bars or wheel carriers or tow kits and lift kits and the likes for this four-wheel drive market. And if I'm sure that quite a lot of you are from Australia, so I'm sure you know how passionate Australians are about their off-roading and the outback, right? So this is a market that's quite vibrant in Australia. There are lots of manufacturers that make this kit, and this company that we work with is actually one of the companies that's iconic in this space, and they had some really good customers. And also, I'm sure if anyone that has familiarity into this market knows these aftermarket accessories that they make for four-wheel drives, they have to be made like almost to fit into each vehicle like a glove, right? So if you're talking about a Toyota Land Cruiser or a Nissan Patrol or a Mitsubishi Pajero, the bull bar has to be designed specifically for each of these, and at the same time, they can't actually manufacture them and hold stock for each different equipment because they don't know how many orders they get, right? So what this customer does is they actually design it in their PLM or product lifecycle management system, and they have the specification for here's the Nissan Patrol Y62 specific bull bar design, right? And when the customer for that has a Nissan Patrol Y62 puts in an order, then the order gets created in the ERP system, and the manufacturing execution system gets told, yes, there's this product that needs to be made, right? And obviously the customer relationship system will have the information about the customer and the customer's order in terms of what they needed. And obviously the product lifecycle management system that they're using will have the product specifications, and then the ERP system and manufacturing execution system will have the order details. But what's important to understand is when we actually started working with this customer, all these IT systems, the CRM system or the PLM system, which is the product lifecycle management system, and the ERP system and the MES system, they have all this information about the customer and the product that they're making. However, the tools on the factory floor, all the operational technologies, they don't actually have knowledge of what is the order, who is the order for, what's the order specification. So what this customer used to do was they actually used to print these lot ID numbers on each part, and this was usually etched into the part, and that would be the way they identified, this is the lot number this, and then they would actually look it up in the console that is at the back of the screen, and then sometimes print it up, then take the paper and walk through the factory where actually they're doing the manufacturing, right? And so once they print these lot numbers onto these parts, because there's a fairly dirty environment, sometimes they become quite hard to read. So what happens is sometimes they read it wrong, and then they end up entering the wrong number into the console, and then they end up getting the wrong specification. So inevitably that causes a lot of errors in the manufacturing and end up making the wrong part, right? So this was one of the challenges they were facing. And then obviously the other challenge was, because this is a company that's evolved over 40 years, they had multiple generation of equipment that were doing the same thing. Some of them were fairly old, and then some of them were relatively new that had a lot of capabilities that built in, that are network connected and could be automatically programmed from remotely. However, being able to use a uniform solution stack across these different generations of equipment was challenging for them, right? So these were like the two of the key challenges they were facing. And then if we really look at what some of the pain points that they were experiencing, obviously, I spoke earlier about understanding the customer order and the specifications. and then obviously I spoke about how the paper-based systems and the manual workflows were error prone. But some of the other issues that they faced were around, the ability to forecast lead time for when the customer's product is going to be available. So when a customer calls in, because the IT systems and the OT systems are not connected, the IT systems doesn't know when the order is going to be ready. So somebody would come into the factory floor and walk around looking for where the customer's order is, and then they would get back to them and say, yeah, it's going to be probably in another two weeks, it's going to come out. But sometimes the production doesn't run to that same the flow of events. So sometimes it would get delayed, and inability to give the customers accurate lead times on the delivery was one of the challenges that they were facing. And the other pain point that they were facing were around scheduled and corrective maintenance that was actually causing a lot of production capacity being lost. Obviously, I spoke earlier about how they had different generations of equipment. So because of that, they knew when the equipment would fail, this would be in lost capacity. So what they used to do was actually instead being proactive and actually schedule maintenance, right? So once you schedule maintenance, they would say, yeah, we're gonna maintain this equipment every 4 weeks. But then that 4-week interval for the maintenance is dependent on what their production capacity is. If they're running at a higher production capacity, then sometimes the equipment would actually break down before that 4-week interval. So that would then result in them having to do corrective maintenance. But sometimes if they're running low on capacity, that would mean if they're doing that maintenance in 4 weeks' time, then they're actually maintaining the equipment before it's really needed, right? So that would mean, again, lost capacity because the equipment is down for that period of the maintenance, right? So this was one of the other pain points that they were facing because of this maintenance inability to optimize maintenance. They were losing a lot of valuable production capacity. And in terms of how the conversation got started, so obviously the CEO of the company had engaged some consultants to come in and have a look at it, the problems, and give them some recommendations. And these consultants had given them a fairly large proposal saying, in order to go through your digital transformation, you'll have to invest multi-million dollars and upgrade some of the equipment so that you can have a uniform tool stack across the factory, and that the dollar figure that was in front of that was something that the CEO and the company owners balked at. And because of that, they didn't really proceed with that proposal. And then they had tried to do a few things by themselves for quite a while, but then realized it wasn't really getting a lot of traction. And then obviously after trying this for a while, then they thought, they needed someone to come in and help understand the problem, and then being able to give them some advice on it. That's how the conversation started. And by the way, the conversation got started off a conversation with the CEO and myself at a bar. We were having a beer after watching a AFL game, and then we got the conversation started. We both happened to be supporting Sydney Swans, but we both lived in Melbourne. And obviously, two people supporting Sydney Swans in Melbourne were sort of a bit of a rare situation to actually create a bit of a connection. So we made the connection through that. So being able to connect to people through that kind of situations, and this happens as such a serendipitous event. So that's how we got started. And obviously, just going into one of the other things that they were looking at was also how can they invest more incrementally in terms of going through this transformation, right? Because obviously they didn't want to commit to that large investment that was put in front of them earlier. So they want to look at a more gradual approach to investing and gradually upgrading. So just going into the customer, how we worked with the customer a little bit more. So initially, how we got started was just looking at designing the strategy and setting the vision, right? So at this point, I'll give you a little bit of an introduction about Anthosa. So Anthosa is a company that got started about 6 years back. And our DNA is about boutique strategy consulting. And we are very much about working with the customer to understand what their problems are and then coming up with solutions to solve them. And we have this strategy engagement orchestration pattern that we use that we call shape, discover, jumpstart, scale, and embed. So in Shape, we try to define the problem and align the leadership and create the vision. And in Discover, we co-design the strategy working with the customers. And then in Jumpstart, what we do is we jumpstart different initiatives to try and identify where there could be value delivered and work with the team to try and deliver that. And then Scale and Embed is essentially going into scaling the transformation across the organization, and then embedding is actually helping to make innovation and transformation key components of the organization's DNA.
Hey, Chamara,
And
question for you. You mentioned they kind of had a big giant sticker shock quote from a different consulting partner, and your team came in and found a way to do it more incrementally and more gradually. Is that a common pattern you see with your customers, that they kind of get like an all-you-can-eat method, but they're looking for something that's more tailored, or how often are you seeing those types of scenarios in your world?
That's actually a fair good question, and Maxey, and it is actually quite common because what I've seen quite a lot of large consultancies do is, they're often looking at, driving the entire transformation themselves, right? So quite often when they get wind of an opportunity, they sort of think the big picture and they come up with these grand designs. And quite often these grand designs have a sticker shock, as you said, affiliated with them. And that's what most of the senior execs and the boards that actually work at, because they get these grand visions, but then they don't really see how it can actually gradually drive outcomes, and that becomes the challenge that they face. I actually have this really nice analogy around what we call the business case dilemma, business case limbo, purgatory, and hell. There's a very nice article that's published on our website where we talk about this, because business skills can sometimes get stuck in limbo because people don't want to make a decision. And then purgatory is where it gets shelved permanently. And then hell is hell is actually my favorite, which is probably the worst case scenario, to be honest, where the business case get approved partially to deliver partial benefits, but they often deliver the partial benefits but end up taking the full investment that was originally forecasted. So no one's happy. So
No, curious about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Just going into how Anthosa engages with customers. So we have a series of strategy accelerators that we use. And one of them is actually what we call the Innovation Strategy Accelerator. And this is actually what we use to this customer to initially set the vision and talk to them about how they can drive innovation in the organization, and scaling innovation as the way to try and drive the transformation. Right? If you jump onto Anthosa's website, you can understand a bit more about some of these strategy accelerators. But just going into the project, I'll share a little bit more about how we work with the CEO and the exec leadership around driving the innovation strategy initially. So obviously, in the initial phase, what we did was we worked with the customer's CEO and the senior execs to understand from their language what were their challenges, and obviously that helped us to really come up with a concise view of how each part of the organization saw the challenge. Obviously, the CFO had different views around what his thoughts were around the challenge, and the CTO for the organization had different thoughts around how he wanted to try and drive the transformation, and how he thought this should be done. And then obviously some of the heads of manufacturing and heads of operations had their own views. And defining a vision and aligning the leadership around the vision was actually one of the crucial steps that we had to take, because everyone has different ways that they want to drive. And obviously, if you drive using each of these different waves, you will sometimes get to the outcome you want to. But what often happens is some of the senior leaders are not going to be super happy that you're driving it based on one person's view, and then that drives a little bit of, I guess, dysfunctional dynamics in the senior leadership, which is something you don't want. And then that's why we actually believe this aligning the leadership and getting that common vision, a shared vision that actually addresses everyone's viewpoints, is something that's super important, right? And once we had defined that shared vision and gotten the leadership to senior execs to actually give us the blessings in terms of engaging the broader leadership team and bringing them into designing the strategy, that was the next step that we did. And in designing the strategy, what we did was doing a more of a co-design approach. And without, what that would mean is we ran a series of workshops, and in each of the workshops, we delved very deep into some of the problems that they were experiencing, and we got ton of information from each of the people that are involved in these workshops in terms of what they thought the challenges were, and we use that as a way to try and create a shared understanding of the problem across different parts of the organization. And creating this shared understanding across different parts of the organization was key to aligning the different parts of the organization and creating this shared strategy in terms of how they want to move forward. And once we had done that shared strategy co-design, then it was around understanding, all right, so now we have a shared vision and a aligned vision and a shared strategy in terms of how we want to move forward. What are the different things we can do? And obviously at this point, what we want to be careful is not to over design. So we try to not over design, but at the same time get some clarity on what are the outcomes that we want to drive forward in the organization. So getting the subject matter experts involved in understanding what are the outcomes, and then creating a set of initiatives aligned to each of these outcomes was quite crucial, right? And then obviously once we had defined those outcomes and the initiatives that we want to drive in order to deliver these outcomes, then it was around how do we bring the capacity to try and deliver on these initiatives. And that was about actually one of the methodologies that Anthosa uses when we work with our customers. Once we define the strategy, we usually give the customers three choices. One is they can either work by themselves to implement the strategy and implementing these initiatives themselves, or if they already have a third-party partner that they're working with, they can work with that partner. And or the third option is usually we have a pool of engineering partners that Anthosa has worked with, where we can actually introduce them into the customer. In this case, the customer actually had a partner that they were already working with. So it was around helping this partner to actually understand the strategy and bringing them into some of the strategy workshops also, and then helping them to drive the strategy forward. So
Chamara,
that's the
quick question out here. How important was it to keep these partners in the foreline where they have a complete line of sight in terms of what are you planning for this customer? So really the question is, how early did you find it important to include them in the mix of the conversation?
That's a very good question, Harsh. Actually, we included them in the strategy co-design from upfront. So when we actually planned the workshops that we ran for defining the strategy, this third-party partner that the customer was already working with was actually part of this workshop. They had some of their team members giving us input in terms of what their capabilities were, and also getting a clear understanding of what the customer's actual problems were. So creating that shared understanding between the customer's team members as well as this third-party partner that's going to be supporting the implementation was super important. And then bringing
Absolutely.
them into this conversation was actually very crucial around cutting that gap between strategy and execution. I'm sure you guys all have heard this. There's a massive gap between strategy and execution in most organizations. And then by bringing them into these workshops and including them in defining the strategy was crucial to closing the gap between strategy and implementation for us.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Not a problem. And just in terms of looking at some of the outcomes that were enabled for this customer. So obviously, Maxey spoke earlier about how do we use edge intelligence or intelligence at the edge to try and drive outcomes. So one of the key outcomes that we enabled for this customer was about being able to deploy edge intelligence to bridge the gap between different generations of equipment. So earlier I spoke about how they had different generations of equipment with different sites of levels of capability. And in order to go through a digital transformation, instead of having to upgrade all these machines to the same generation and being able to deploy a uniform solution stack, by deploying edge intelligence and building some bespoke components that allow them to communicate to some of the older devices, but at the same time, being able to understand what the new equipment's capabilities were, and then being able to communicate to them using the capabilities that were already available was one of the things that we deployed, enabled for them. And then the other one was a simple iPad app that actually was able to connect to the edge intelligence to support things like QR code scanning, lot tracking automation, and being able to download the specifications for each of the lots. And by the way, I didn't mention what the QR code, where the QR code scanning came in. So one of the things that we spoke about in the strategy workshops was actually how the existing lot tracking methodology the customer was using was causing a lot of challenges, which I mentioned earlier. So one of the things that we introduced was like a simple QR code that they could use to track each lot. And this the QR code would get glued onto each piece of the material that each order was associated with. And they used a metallic glue so that they can make sure it doesn't peel off. And at the same time, they put the same QR code on the trolley that had each parts as well. So the same QR code would go on the trolley on each part, and that way, being having to misplace parts or being able to relocate part that's dropped on the factory floor became quite a breeze for them. And what did this all result in? Obviously, this all resulted in reduced defects, being able to get more clarity on being able to forecast lead times for when the orders would finish, and obviously most importantly, being able to improve the quality, right? And what they were also able to do as part of some of the work that we continued forward with them was obviously because they had these different generations of equipment, sometimes in order to get the accuracy of the tolerances of the parts that they were manufacturing, they had to run the same piece through the equipment multiple times. But they realized by using some of the older equipment to sort of like do the pre-fabrication and then using some of the newer machines to do post-fabrication, they were able to actually improve the capacity utilization for this equipment. So they actually re-engineered their manufacturing process to be able to understand, take benefit to benefit from this because of this work that we did with them, right? And then the other outcome was around being able to transition into more predictive maintenance instead of having to do proactive scheduled maintenance or corrective maintenance, right? So earlier I spoke about how some of the equipment were being scheduled to maintain on a regular basis because they knew that failure is coming, right? So in some cases they managed to do the maintenance before it failed, but in some cases when they're running high capacity, it would actually cause equipment to fail, and they would end up having to do corrective maintenance. But during the workshops, what we found out was one of the team members said, by the way, this machine, if it's failing, we know these two parts that are going to overheat before it fails. And then in some cases, we actually catch it before it fails, but in some cases, we don't catch it because we just busy with other things and we just miss it. And what we were able to do was actually help them put in a simple infrared sensor that would capture the temperature of this part that's overheating and allow them to actually, trigger a red light to go on that everyone can see in the factory floor. And that would then straight away trigger them to stop the manufacturing and then put the equipment into more predictive maintenance.
Definitely better than standing with the thermometer next to it.
That's it.
So
these are some of the
how did the like some statistics like mean time between repairs or failures, like did the customer have any insights on any of these before any of these transformative processes, or was that a complete unknown?
They did have some data around the MTTF and MTTR, but I don't have the data right off the top of my head. But qualitatively, if I were to look at what the impact was, it's more around, obviously, what I spoke about earlier, right? If they're doing scheduled maintenance, they're doing scheduled maintenance based on the gut, right? Gut or the past experience, if I can use that, right? But past experience to do maintenance every 4 weeks would be dependent on the production capacity that they're running through, right? So if they're running at a higher production capacity, sometimes that 4 weeks maintenance window is not enough, right? So the equipment might actually end up breaking down anyway. And in some cases, when they're running lower production capacity, when you do that 4-week maintenance window, you're actually maintaining the equipment before it's absolutely necessary. But by having these infrared sensors in the equipment that they knew would be overheating before it failed, they were actually able to actually understand, right now, depending on the capacity that we are running, we know the equipment's actually gonna fail pretty soon. So they can actually straight away get someone on the phone and get them to come and replace this part that's gonna fail. So it was that more, being able to optimize capacity through that. But I think, Harsh, like Maxey earlier spoke about, how data is the new oil and how data is the new lifeblood of organizations, right? So to me, I think this is one of the best outcomes that we able to deliver for this customer, right? So obviously we worked with them over a year and a bit before we were able to deliver some of these outcomes for them. But what we set them up for is actually the ability to capture this data and be able to build more intelligent modules in a more central maintenance system that they could implement in the future, where they can actually do more intelligent algorithms, build more intelligent algorithms around predictive maintenance, so that instead of the temperature sensor being the marker, they can actually build algorithms and say, yeah, for this generation of equipment, for this suite of equipment, we know it's going to be failing in 10,000 cycles or whatever that the number of cycles is. So they can collect a lot of data that can use in the future around driving more intelligence into the organization.
Yeah, of course.
So at this point, I'll hand over to Harsh around how we actually deployed Centreon to get visibility of all the operational technologies that they had, and what level of connectivity and intelligence they had available for the equipment. And Harsh will talk about how we use the Centreon solution to try and facilitate that, what equipment were there, and also understand how that helped us with mapping the business processes within the factory. Over to you, Harsh.
Of course. Thanks, Samara. That was great. Just out of curiosity, what was the overall sales cycle from the first time you met that CEO at that bar to when this deal was signed?
That's a great question. So obviously, as I mentioned earlier, that I met their CEO at a bar after a AFL game between Swans, and I can't remember the other Victorian teams, by the way. But anyway, it's relevant. That would have been actually between two of the lockdowns that Victoria went into in 2020. I think it would have been about sort of October or November 2020 when two of the lockdown has it might have been even before that, actually, maybe towards August or September, right? And then we had the deal signed towards end of January, early February. So it's about 3 to 4 months was the sales cycle. But in between that 3 to 4 months, I met with the CEO and his senior leadership team a couple of times. I went and spoke to some of the people on the manufacturing floor a couple of times, and having all these conversations to understand a lot of the challenges that they faced, and being able to communicate to them and understand and the pain and the challenges that they were facing with really helped to move the sales cycle along.
Okay. Understood. Makes sense. So that was indeed a complex cycle in terms of getting the buy-in from different business leaders to having all of the partners included into the mix. So good job on that. So welcome everyone out here again. I'm Harsh. I'm responsible for channel management across North America and APAC for Centreon. And today I'm going to be explaining on how and why we ended up deploying Centreon, with the main purpose of gaining visibility about a manufacturing facilities operational technology, and why was that important to map it out to business processes and workflows as a whole. So before I get into that, let's talk about who is Centreon. So Centreon's an infrastructure monitoring platform. We've been going for a little bit over the last 18 years. We started off as an open source project, and by the virtue of that, we ended up being sort of a customer-led growth product story over the years. And whenever you end up being a customer-led growth product story, you've got no choice but to build a habit to be at very close, proximity to your, end users or your end partners, to sort of, get a pulse on, what are they talking about, where are they building the product, what sort of challenges are they facing, and how are they overcoming those challenges, and stuff like that. So Centreon has a very big, vibrant community of open source users. We have more than 250,000 open source users that would probably originate from Japan and go all the way to Peru. So literally it's around the globe. And when I talk about these users, they could be really small organizations to some really meaty, chunky, big organizations who can be classified as Fortune 500 and Fortune 100 companies. They could be in the private space. They could be in the public space. They could be partners of all orders. That could be managed service providers. That could be resellers. Could be system integrators. So, after having spoken to all these different, gamut of, as we call it, the Centreon universe, what we've understood is that the people who are responsible for managing infrastructure are essentially, looking for three main things, which were pretty identical in the use case that Chamara just, walked us through as well, which was essentially an industrial environment. So point number one is, they are looking for comprehensive visibility of, what's happening in their infrastructure, because it's this infrastructure that is supporting their workflows, their services, and their business processes. So, such in the example that Chamara explained, they had a very diverse range of technology stack that had very legacy, equipments that had included operational technology for their equipment systems, for their sensors, for their surveillances, endpoint communications. They also had IT systems, meaning their ERPs, their CRMs, their manufacturing equipment systems. So, inherently, all these technologies by default are not designed to work together, right? And the challenge that comes about when these technologies don't work together is that there is a lot of diversity, there is a lot of data silos that makes monitoring all of this very, very, very challenging. In certain cases, you are still able to go out there and monitor all of this, but it definitely lacks a single glass of paint kind of an experience. So in the example of the spare parts manufacturer, it was established and understood at a very early stage that the customer was in a very reactive approach, especially when it came to incidents and breakdowns. And as a result of that, at the time, it was kind of impossible for them to predict that a particular incident that's caused a breakdown, how is that going to impact a shipment, let alone a shipment? Which shipment is going to get impacted was, kind of, unknown. So clearly, hope was a strategy at this point of time, and it's a very, sucky situation to be in when really you're playing on hope. So, hence we kind of realized straight off the bat that there is it's going to be very critical out here to monitor some critical business processes which are extremely important for this manufacturing facility. And these critical business processes that need to be monitored, they not only involve informational technology like IT, but they also involve OT, right? When we talk about IT, they wanted to be monitoring levels like, applications. They wanted to monitor servers. They wanted to monitor middleware, operating systems, databases, private cloud, public cloud, data centers that are kilometers away, DR locations that are, probably in another city. So, it was a fairly sort of a complex, ecosystem of IT. And on top of that, they were also experimenting with their, with their sort of IoT journey, which sort of you have to, sort of try out a bunch of things and fail to know exactly what works best for you. So they were in need of a tool which allowed them to scale. At the same point of time, it allowed them to remain agile and not be restrictive in terms of what can they work with. So that is exactly something that was super important to them. It was also important to them to bring together and tie in IT and OT from the standpoint where they had services that originated in the cloud or in the data centers, and then this service after origination was literally being delivered at edge locations. That could be a manufacturing plant, that could be a retail shop, that could be a traffic light, it could be literally anywhere. So it was important for them to have a single glass of pane experience of this entire business process. This is something that was unable to be achieved prior to, I would say, Centreon coming into the mix, but we could do this, very well with Centreon, given that, we have a catalog of connectors, which are, pre-configured probes that allow you to just, go in there and start collecting metrics in a very, pre-configured manner, that saves engineering time and cost and, hurdles of getting started and stuff like that. So we were able to deploy these and, start collecting metrics out of all these different kind of assets. Not only that, it was also very important for this to be done in a time efficient manner where they do not have to manually go out there and start adding all these different assets. So having some functionalities and components like running nightly auto discovery scans, solved a large pain point for them, as we all know that IT teams are sort of a moving target, right? Like things keep getting taken out of scope and keep getting added to scope, like literally every single day. So this is a problem that could be solved by auto discovery scans on fixed parameters. So point number one, that they really wanted a solution for was achieving full visibility of their infrastructure and what's happening in it. The second point that their business leaders, were really looking upon was that they were considering, and I'm sure a lot of us will agree or disagree to this, but they were considering their IT as a cost center, right? And we face this a lot of times today, where business leaders are not really IT people. They come from different walks of lives, and really IT is looked as a cost center. So it's become ever so important today and essential to not only track but also validate, where is tech saving money, where is tech making improvements, what are the processes that have gotten better because of certain systems being able to perform at certain desired levels, how is that impacting the bottom line revenues just because of infrastructure being able to perform at the levels that it was performing. Now it's not only important to track this, but it's also important to paint this picture in a very easy to sort of read and understand sort of a format, right? We are able to do this, especially with Centreon, it's very easily, because we are able to populate reports that can be downloaded easily in a PDF format, literally every night. And not only that, but you could also come up with a lot of graphical custom views that are very easy to read, very sexy looking, and has a very good user experience, and you don't need to be a tech geek or a genius to comprehend if your business is impacted or it's all in the green, right? So this is it's we would like to call that alignment between tech and business. So that is I would say, um, a factor that was very important to business leaders as well as tech leaders at this particular manufacturing plant. And with Centreon we could sort of give something to each one of them, right? Lastly, the tech leaders, as they Chamara mentioned that they had a very diverse landscape of hardware as well as software, that was some dinosaur era hardware, as well as some very modern smart computing IoT devices. So it was integral for this tech team to protect their investment. It was very easy for us to go in and say that this is a technology that is kind of difficult for us to start monitoring, but that would have not rubbed the customer the very right way. Given Centreon's open source DNA, we were able to go in and protect their existing investments that they have made on their existing aging hardware. We did not have any connectors readily available in place that they could just use out of the box. But given our open source DNA, we could go out there and create something that was not possible. So these were the three sort of essentials that this consumer at the end was looking out for. To reiterate, they were looking for complete visibility of what's happening in their ecosystem of infrastructure. They were looking for a tool that could help align their tech leaders and their business leaders in terms of project, how are we getting better, where are we saving money, how much energy are we consuming, where can it be, had where could we do a better job at it. And lastly, they wanted a tool that could protect their existing investments and not consider them obsolete. So the results that we saw, as a result of doing this, was essentially they were able to, correlate their entire business process that involved IT as well as OT in a single glass of plain experience. They were able to deploy, smart IoT solutions by the means of experimenting and knowing, of sorts, what's working for them, that allowed them to future-proof their operation and sort of build a predictive stance on, what are the sort of lead times on manufacturing, and if these lead times are getting impacted in by the means of that impact, what kind of deliveries are going to get impacted. And as a result of knowing this beforehand, they were able to make customer expectations align accordingly as well. And as a result of that, at the end of the day, they were able to deliver a better customer experience, not only for their internal employees, but also for their 360 degree of, I would say, customers, vendors, and whoever the organization as a whole interacted with. So if I know there's a large audience here, so if there are any other challenges that you all face on a day-to-day and are wondering if a monitoring tool can solve for that, feel free to reach out. We have a Q&A session at the end. Feel free to drop in your questions as well. Happy to chat about them. Chamara, sorry, you have a question?
Oh, you're muted.
Oh, sorry. Like the cardinal sin, I was on mute. Yeah, I think what you mentioned about the different generations of hardware the company had, and how Centreon's existing capability was able to monitor them out of the box for some of the newer ones, but for some of the older ones, how you were able to redesign and re-implement new components was key part of it, right? And I think, like, if we can maybe understand a little bit more about, typically if you are creating a new component that's actually monitoring something that's previously not monitored, maybe can you share with the audience a little bit more about how what would the process look like? How long would that take?
Absolutely, that's a great question. So there are a couple of ways in which we can approach this situation. The first possible approach is, we have a mandate that we keep growing, 100 plus connectors every year. So we have a catalog of 750. By 2025, it should easily reach 850. How do we do this? Is we don't go about deciding that these are the 100 that we want to create. We have I would say a list, for the lack of a better word, where our users are allowed to, mention what are the kind of connectors that they would like us to come up with. And they're able to put that in this list. Not only the connectors, but also what are the kind of services they would like to extract out of these connectors, and metrics that they would like to pull out of the assets that they would want to monitor. So this is essentially, a list that they would put all these desires on. The only, I would say, con of putting something on this list is it does not guarantee that this connector is going to build in the next month or so. It can take 1 month, it can take 2 months, or it can take 6 months, right? There is no urgency applied. So the second option is if you would like us to sponsor this development for you, or if you would like to sponsor this development, and by the means of that, if you happen to sponsor it, it's a fairly quick turnaround, and we could have it develop in less than 5-6 business days, depending upon the complexity of the connector that's required to be developed.
Great, thanks for that, Haj. And I think one of the benefits of working with Centreon as an open source platform is obviously the source is available. So if the customers themselves want to write the monitoring agent themselves, that's probably something that they might be able to do as well. Is that an option as well?
100%. And I would strongly recommend anyone who's being part of the Centreon community must partake in The watch. The watch is the community of open source users. It's more than 250,000 open source users. This is the space where people would go in and sort of comment that, these are the challenges that we were facing, these are the problems that we've come up with, and these are the outcomes that we see after, after coming up with this kind of a solution. So it's a great space to sort of get started at, to sort maybe, someone's faced the exact same problem and you can save time by just picking up a
Indeed.
solution that exists.
Indeed, and I think just relating to this particular customer's use case, I think the monitoring device that we built, agent that we built for the temperature sensors was one of those things.
Great.
Great.
So I guess I'll pass it on to Maxey.
Yeah, maybe just to jump in and reflect on a couple of those things. So open source, we're big believers. We have a big part of our product in open source. We don't build connectors for observability, but we see a lot of unique hardware, different components, new Jetson devices coming out of NVIDIA, et cetera. That's a space in open source where we get a lot of contributions, and very similar model, I guess, around open source. And the other thing you mentioned that I think really resonates with our world is OT and IT, and how that's starting to converge. It varies by industry and company, and often they're pretty strong firewalls, or even commercial firewalls facing the two environments inside a single company. We've seen that. But more and more, I think the teams are recognizing that OT, which is operational technology, it's kind of the core business, it's the money producer in an industrial, needs to work closer with IT because they bring protection and security and all those things about it. So that consolidation, or that coming together, that the shaking hands, if you might, of those two teams is something we see a lot in our world as well. So definitely resonates across those types of things. I realize I didn't necessarily introduce ZEDEDA up front, so maybe just who are we, what do we do? We're edge orchestration and management. So what does that mean? You can think of us as really a hypervisor solution for devices outside your data center. And then on top of that hypervisor, you can run all sorts of workloads. A common pattern we see is, something old running next to something new. So the old could be, Windows 95, Windows NT, or maybe an old Linux distribution where it's connected to a machine, and the developer that wrote that application may not even be in the company anymore. It's one of those applications where nobody touches it because it still works, but it still needs to operate on the edge. And having a hypervisor where you can run these legacy workloads alongside modern is something our customers love. And on the modern side, it's kind of what you'd expect from the cloud, containers, be it Dockerized or Kubernetes-based container implementations. And, we really give our customers the flexibility to kind of run whatever they need to run on top. And we see firewalls, we see networking solutions, we see all sorts of solutions, and we do that for them at scale. And what they do is they centrally set things up. We have a big API engine where you kind of define how you want things to work. And then your nodes, be it, tens, hundreds, thousands, or tens of thousands, sort of check in and make that a reality. So we work with some of the largest enterprises on the planet doing, mass deployments of, big old virtual machines from the 90s right next to Kubernetes clusters, delivering outcomes like we talked about today, better utilization of your manufacturing, better order tracking, customer success faster, delivering these outcomes that really bring value to their customers and those sorts of things. So that's really our business. I think one of the benefits within the use case we've been talking about comes a little bit in experimentation. Once you have a system like this in place, you have observability, you can see what's going on, you have, the teams all involved, built the right solution. There's follow-on ideas that always happen. And it could be something as, hey, I want to deploy something new that instead of saves money, generates money. Or it could be, when we did the first iteration of that sensor application, we didn't consider vibration. So let's add vibration to that. There's constant iteration on these devices. And often these edge devices live, 5 to 10 years in the field. So you don't want to send somebody with a USB key or a laptop to log in to 10,000 devices and update software. You really need a centralized way of doing that. And that's some of the value that we bring is that experimentation piece. And, from that central console, you can kind of turn things on and off. You can sort of re-platform your applications as they mature. You may want to bring in, I don't know, a persistent database to store data. You want to update your AI model. Often these models drift, or the data starts to drift, and you need to refresh these models. So again, being able to do that in a centralized manner, in a really couple clicks, really simplifies the life of customers that use our platform and those sorts of things. And it is, kind of going back to these outcomes. That really is kind of the point of this. We tend to get involved in these projects a little further down the road. Often they've defined what they want to build. Their internal teams have built some applications, or maybe they're third party, or maybe they're working with great firms like Anthosa to kind of build out these applications. They have one or two running in the lab. They've verified they work, and they kind of hit that brick wall of, okay, how do we put this in 10,000 places? And certainly you could sort of script your way out of that if you so dared to. But fundamentally, folks typically look for an orchestration platform. And that's really our business, is allowing these enterprises to distribute those assets in a really secure way, dealing with that threat vector I talked about, where you're outside the data center and securing your workloads, but still leaving it open for experimentation, as the solution evolves. So that's really ZEDEDA in a nutshell. This was a super interesting project. I like the 4-wheel drive aspects of it. I think it's cool to build custom parts, and I've yet to go to the Outback and do 4-buying, but I hope to come down there soon and take care of that. But this was a fun project. I think we learned a lot. I think the team came together in a good way, and I think in general, hopefully you guys get that as we kind of went through the details here. So I know we're kind of coming up on the end of the hour. I do want to spend a few more minutes and hit some of the questions. So hopefully folks will stick with us a little bit longer. I'm not sure who's asking. You want me to ask the first question? I mean, I'm happy to sort of take it. And let's see. How did deploying an observability solution help in identifying and monitoring critical technological assets within an organization? So Harsh, I assume that's a question for you. It's around observability. Do you want to take that one?
Yeah, certainly. So in terms of deploying an observability solution, and how it was helpful in identifying and monitoring critical assets within an organization, specifically when we talk about the manufacturing plants as a use case, more often than not, we come to realize that one of the main issues that manufacturing facilities face is tracking their L1, L2, L3 equipment, or tracking their manufacturing facility as a whole, from a single network operation center, who's probably a very lean team, has not more than 20, 25, 50 employees, and they are responsible for non-stop delivering 24/7 operations. And in certain use cases, they are responsible for quality checking. In certain use cases, they are responsible for really manufacturing, the products. In certain use cases, they are responsible for, quality control and predictive maintenance, and stuff like that helps keep the show, ongoing. So deploying an observability solution that is able to sort of monitor the entire use case, from IT as well as OT, is really the key in being able to critically monitor every technology asset within an organization that is responsible for monitoring business processes as a whole. It can also be important to take into account how easy it is to scale this tool, from if we are to introduce any new technologies tomorrow, or if we are able to if we want to use a hybrid approach in terms of maximizing what we already have and taking the best advantage of something that's to come. Will I have to commit to something that is not going to be acceptable tomorrow, is something that you need to take into account for today. But given some open source tools that are available out there, it could really help shape up the monitoring or the observability stack as a whole in a comprehensive way.
Yeah, that makes a
Yeah.
lot of sense.
Yeah.
And I would imagine you sort of see people starting with their most critical asset and then sort of continuing down that list to add more and more stuff to it. Cool. Very cool. So let's see. I think, Chamara, this one's probably for you. I mean, anybody can weigh in here, but it's basically a question around automation replacing jobs. So, how do you overcome the resistance to digital transformation? People are fearful of, like if I'm using QR scanners and not tracking labels anymore, like, is my job going to go away? Like, how do you sort of deal with the people aspect of the digital transformation side?
That's a great question, actually. And I think if I can actually go back to that original proposal that was put in front of the customer with a big sticker shock, and one of the things that actually caused a lot of challenges with moving forward that particular proposal for them, other than the sticker shock, was actually the fact that some of the new equipment that they were going to introduce into the flow actually had a lot of automation. So that actually would have meant reducing, taking away some of the jobs, because people are no longer needed to do some of that work. But the approach that we took was actually, instead of purely looking at automation and replacing jobs with automation, we focus more on how could we actually get more visibility and get more data from the manufacturing operation, and how does that drive better outcomes for the manufacturing operation in terms of their production efficiencies, and then B, from a customer perspective, the ability to give them better visibility of the forecast for when the product is going to be delivered, and then C, in terms of the equipment in the facility, how can we help them improve the equipment capacity by optimizing things like maintenance, right? So the approach that we took was actually getting the team to realize that our focus is not about automation and replacing jobs, but rather it's about getting better data so that we can actually make smarter decisions to improve the operation and the organization as a whole, and give better outcomes to the customer. So once we actually worked with the team to try and get clarity on that, and I think the strategy workshops that we did with the broader team helped a lot with that. Because when we spoke to a lot of the extended team about understanding their pain points, and also understanding a lot of the customer pain points that were associated with this customer, with this particular organization, we were very focused on making sure it's about how do we get data, how do we use data to make better decisions. So taking that data, the base perspective of digital transformation, was actually one of the critical factors for us. And then the second aspect was obviously being able to take the team on the journey in terms of creating that shared understanding and getting them to realize this is not about replacing their jobs with automation, it's about adding value to the organization as a whole. So to me, I think those are the two critical aspects.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I think similar concerns around AI today. You hear about like, AI is going to take my job, but I think it makes people more productive than it does take jobs. And I think digital transformation, very similar. I think, similar fears flowing from different sort of projects, those sorts of things. I
Absolutely.
know we're maybe one or two more questions here. This one I think is for you, Arsh. 700 connectors. That's a lot. I guess there's a lot of OT protocols, a lot of IT protocols. Like, what do you mean by zero config connectors, and what are maybe the advantages of those?
Yeah. So zero config connectors, firstly, yes, we are a market leader in terms of, our probe of catalog of connectors that we have when you compare it to any other observability platform. So we do enjoy a first movers advantage on that. And why so is that, very important. So zero config connectors allow for rapid development of monitoring solutions, without the user or the consumer needing to extensively manually configure, if that makes sense. And this means, that the organizations can actually start monitoring their infrastructure, almost immediately so this helps them sort of get more efficient, reduces the time to, start doing the job. It simplifies the process as a whole. It also reduces the risk of human error. So because it's, zero config is required, to essentially start these connectors off the ground, there is absolutely little to no risk of human errors while doing the setup in terms of process and in terms of getting reliable data on in a I would say in a time sensitive way, and that is recurring and continuous, because at the end of the day it's monitoring critical systems. So if they are comprehensively and properly monitored with potential risks being minimum, that allows them to sort of develop consistency, allows them to deploy them at scale, it allows them to be cost efficient. So yeah, there are a bunch of, I would say, business focused benefits that the zero config connectors would make any user realize.
Very cool. It just works, right?
Yeah,
Just works.
just does the job.
All right, one more and maybe a selfish one. So and maybe Chamara weigh in on this one, and I can weigh in as well. But why did ZEDEDA as a platform make sense for this particular customer?
And I think that's a good question. And I think, when it comes to selecting the technology stack for these customers, we felt like a platform like ZEDEDA was quite useful, because it gave flexibility in terms of the different types of hardware and the AI software stacks that we could use. So the customer already had a couple of teams that were tinkering with OpenVINO, so we actually were able to further utilize that, the work and the investment that the team had put in. And then they also realized some of the machine vision capabilities that they wanted to build. A platform like using NVIDIA Jetson could actually be quite useful for that. So selecting ZEDEDA gave us that flexibility around the technology platform. And I think more importantly to me, I think one of the best things to come out of using ZEDEDA here was that the ability to deploy software in industrial environment like this with a cloud-like ease, with a cloud experience, was actually one of the biggest selling points for us, for this customer, right? Being able to tell them, if you're building software on AWS or Google or Azure, if your team's familiar with that, we can actually use the team that's already doing that, but then, use that same sort of toolkits that we would use in that environment to be able to deploy software into the industrial environment in the manufacturing operation. So some of the IT team members were actually quite happy that we were taking that approach, because then the skills that they had already developed in building cloud applications for this customer were actually quite transferable to be able to build operational technologies. So the CTO straight away jumped on the bandwagon and said, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. My team can actually help build some of this software that you need. And then obviously the third-party partner that they had also already had capabilities in the cloud space. So that meant, it's not a steep learning curve for them to actually start using ZEDEDA for building applications for the industrial environment that we needed. So for us, I think those were quite a lot of the selling points for using ZEDEDA. I'm sure, Maxey, you have a lot of other things that you might want to add to that as well.
You said it very well. I couldn't have said it better. I think that's a great answer. And I think we're out of time. I do want to encourage people to, visit the websites. We have some great materials on there, specifically some use cases around vertical use cases. So if you're in manufacturing, we talked a bit about that today, but if you're in automotive or healthcare or other verticals, all of our websites have great materials on it. There's a pretty good video selection on the Anthosa section, as well as Centreon. There's great things. And then we encourage you to connect, follow. We're all on LinkedIn. If you have questions that didn't get answered, or you want to learn more about something, please reach out. Otherwise, guys, great conversation. Really appreciate the time today. Good job, and look forward to our next few projects and coming back and telling the world about it. So really appreciate the time today, and thank you for those that attended. We will make this recording available. We'll chop it up, put it on the website, etc. So look forward to the follow-up there, and thank you for everyone's time and attendance. You guys have a great day, great afternoon, or great evening.
Thanks, Maxey. Thanks, Chamara.
Thanks, Maxey.
Thanks for
Thanks,
joining,
Ash.
everyone.
Cheers, everyone. Thank you very much for joining today.